forward on this computer. All right, sir, you're good to go.
Okay. Well, hopefully you can see that question mark there.
Yes.
It's always been the question among philosophers, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And my philosophy is I don't care as long as it comes by rail. So we're going to look at how that happened.
Just a second, Doug. Joel, can you click on the got it message there in the middle of the screen?
I don't have a got it message.
Okay, it's evidently being driven by my computer. Then we got a message in the middle of the screen here to.
Yeah, you just need to click on that. I get that every time somebody turns on a record and I just have to click it off.
Yeah, I'm trying
on it that I got it.
I'm trying to get my mouse to allow me to do that.
Well, that's what happens when you look at it sideways.
I know
it. Yeah, that's Zoom's built-in protection to make sure that everyone involved understands that it's being recorded.
Yeah, I got that. Why can't I get it to go away? I'll work on it. Go ahead.
All right. So, as I said, as long as it comes by rail, and of course, chickens were shipped by rail as in what were called poultry cars. And here's a really nice photo of a live poultry transit company's car, very typical of the poultry cars. We will be looking at these and some of the details. I will confess that I've stole almost all of this presentation from Christian Dummler. She put this together and gave it several years ago at the Chicagoland RPM. And then a number of photos from Ray Breyer that she had used, and then I also have, and then many other sources. I have, of course, modified this presentation to fit how I want to do it, and I had different photos than she did. But again, the poultry car here, as you can see, we've got a center section, and we've got a door here. This one's got a sliding bar door as well for ventilation. You can see where the chicken coops, these were all built in. This car would have 7 layers, 8 layers of chicken coops across here, all ventilated. And then there would be a door in each end of the car that also could be opened for ventilation. And if you've ever been around chickens, you'll understand the need for ventilation. The chickens were shipped alive. The main reason was there was the Jewish communities on the East Coast. Chicken to be consumed had to be killed on the same day it was consumed. It was part of the kosher dietary laws, as I understand it. And so the Jewish housewives wanted a fresh live bird for their family dinner. Whereas almost all the rest of the country, and particularly the Christian housewife, a dressed bird from the butcher was just fine for her and her family. So, but we'll move on here. The early years, then we're talking 1860s, 1870s, as rail travel started to develop in this country. You created the live birds in small wooden crates, loaded them in the box cars, stacked them on flat cars. Most did not survive that trip. And those that did had illness, weight loss, serious problems getting to market. Dressed poultry came in lots via the early refrigerator cars. But if you've ever seen a chilled chicken carcass, it doesn't look very appealing. So, and those that were placed near the ice bunkers, of course, arrived in better state. And then William Jenkins and James Streeter conceived the first design for the live poultry car, similar to what we just saw. This was in 1884. They patented the concept, and a single open compartment stock car with wire mesh sides, broken into multiple level series of individual coops. Each were fitted with feed and water troughs. Of course, anytime you're shipping something live, you got to take care of it. So, and with the birds, that's how they did that. Here's a little film. You can see the farmer He's got his crate chickens, hauling them to market, stacked up, ready to be loaded into the poultry car. And this is pretty much how it was done. Bird was pulled out of the crate, inspected, looked at to make sure it was a healthy bird. Then they would put into another crate. So I've got several of these video clips. So some of them have sound, some of them do not. And here we see a shot of the birds loaded in the poultry car. This fellow's throwing up feed for them. Each car had a caretaker that traveled with the birds. And you can see that, and here we are, this fellow is feeding the birds inside using the little trough for each cage. And here we are unloading a car. And you can see they go in, they grab some birds by the legs, fill the crates get put on a truck and go to wherever the market demands they go. I think this video is about a minute long, so it's, so, you know, anybody wants to throw in and make comments, will go right ahead. There we seem to be at the end of it. So let's move on. Here is a early poultry car. As you can see, it's essentially a stock car where they've taken the slats off the side and put up basically what we would call today a chicken wire type of wire covering, and they would just stack the chicken coops inside these. The difficulty with this was that the farmers wanted their chicken coops back because they own those chicken coops, and that did not happen with this type of car. The going back to Jenkins Streeter, it was a unique design, but there was no care design to keep the birds alive, keep them healthy and alive. Shrinking was a big problem. And the loading, unloading of coops was done outside the car. Small size limited the number of birds that could be transported. So they did several design changes to addition, so new patents in 85, 88, 80, and 1891. But here's a sketch of what the original car looked like. Some more of the details related to that, including this is the 84 patent, and then we've got some feed and water troughs there. The revised plan was broken up 3 compartments. 2 were coop areas, feed storage, water system, a small room for attendant in the center of the car. And this is where the coops are now assessed from the inside instead of outside, so that this allowed for loading, unloading of birds from inside, where you had better control if one got out of your hands. And then the doors open to the aisle from the center stateroom, as they called it. And the stateroom had a sink, stove, and a bunk for the attendant, so that he could travel with the birds, feed and water them regularly, and make sure they arrived healthy and ready for market. The ceiling had a rectangular water tank, and then there was a feed box under the floor with a trap door. So he had access to water and feed for his birds. Here again, you can see this is the attendant stateroom in the middle, the cages or coops as they were called. Here's the box underneath for storage of the feed. So there were a number of drawings that were done of these cars as they were being developed, and you can find these online. So these are, I think, all come out of the Railroad Car Journal about 1900, 1910, if I remember right, for these drawings. Again, Christian's the one that did a lot of the research and found a lot of this stuff. So I'm not 100% sure on the sources. So In 1890, the Continental Live Poultry Company offered a longer car. This one had space for 7,000 birds. And they had support from the Michigan Central. I don't suppose anyone on this group is familiar with the Michigan Central. But we only have these two images that we're familiar with. And these were designed so that the crates or chicken coops that the farmers brought could be brought in and stacked up in the car. So, and it was quite a lengthy car for its time. And you can see Railway Review published it in 1890. Then we had a company called the American Live Poultry Company. They began operations in 1909, and they had a patent for a car that had slats on it to be closed tight to protect the birds from harsh climates. You guys are experiencing harsh climate today, is that correct?
Could say that.
Yeah.
We're using
Unfortunately,
we're using our outdoor ice boxes today.
Oh, good. Yeah. So we don't have to worry if you lose electric power. You still can.
No.
Yep.
Just go to the porch.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, this particular car design did not catch on, and the company dissolved in 1911. Here's what the end of this car looked like. You can see they had a sliding door here that you could be slid that open. But poultry cars began to grow in popularity. In let's see, in 1890, 56 cars were in operation. By 1903, it had grown to 825 private cars with very little competition. We had the company was known as the Live Poultry Transportation Company at that point. Dozens of patents, etc. It seemed everybody was wanting to ship chickens. They found that there was money in doing it. So what's interesting is as these cars were built and developed, they were given individual names. Names seemed to be for places or for some type of a bird, fowl, and others were sometimes named after individuals. And almost, it seems like almost every fast freight headed into a large metropolitan area had poultry cars in the consist. Then in 1910, they developed a steel underframe and other safety upgrades, as was happening with all freight cars. And the wooden frame cars were remodeled, retired. So in 1909, the Lemac Carrier Company got into the game where they had developed 150 live poultry cars, quickly grew to 400. They were sued for patent infringement, so they disappeared as a company sometime in the 20s. And then there were some railroads that owned their own poultry cars, and there were references to Michigan Central, Lehigh Valley, the Southern, Lackawanna, Norfolk Western, and a few others, including some West Coast railroads that have poultry cars listed in ORERs. Here is a photo of the Lehigh Valley poultry car. And you can see it's a little bit different from the other cars I've been showing you. Here's a drawing for the Southern Railway poultry car, very similar to the live poultry transit companies. Here's a Canadian Pacific poultry car. And here's a good example. You can see the doors sliding on the end for again, that ventilation purpose. So this is Pacific Wholesale Poultry. This is Petaluma, California. They owned a couple of cars. Petaluma is about 30 miles or so north of the San Francisco Bay Area. And Petaluma became known as the chicken egg capital of the West Coast. And these cars probably made round trips from Petaluma down to San Francisco and back via the ferries. And of course, they couldn't keep up with the demand for cars. They had over 1,000 in operation in 1914. By 1921, they had over 2,000 cars. I don't want to read all that for you, so we'll move on. This is another film from. Yeah, this one does not have sound. Some do.
Doug, did they consider live poultry everything from chickens to pigeons to turkeys to ducks to everything, or just chickens?
No, it was anything that, you know, that was a consumable fowl.
Okay.
So here you can show they've moved the crate into the attendant's stateroom, and now you can see them watching their loading. But yes, you chickens were the I don't want to do this. Yeah, it was chickens, ducks, pigeons. Turkeys, they discovered, did not transport well as live birds. So there was very little in the more of turkeys. That's where the dressed frozen turkey for Thanksgiving came into being by the 1920s, because they lost too many birds in transit with trying to ship them live. Turkeys react funny to being transported that way. So, but yeah, everything else was pretty much shipped. And I got pictures of a pigeon car in here that we'll show you in a minute. So you can see that then they finally got some more competition. Oh, there were 2,800 live poultry cars at the peak by the late 20s. We had the Palace Poultry Car Company came into being 1924, and they grew up to 400 cars. And then in 1926, the North American Car Corporation took them over. A few years later, North American purchased the Live Poultry Transit Company and took them over in 1930. So after 1930, all these cars were under the control of North American. Here is a Palace Poultry car. Not too much in the way of different from. The biggest thing I noticed in these is this has got an elevated walkway, and so you have vents up here that could be opened or closed in the top of the car, kind of like a clear story window. And so the running board was on a raised supports. So, and again, you can see it. Yes.
Is that a little exhaust thing like from a stove or something there right above the
right.
word Palace?
The attendant had a stove in here to keep him warm.
Okay. Not the cooked chickens that didn't make it.
Yeah. Well, I got another video showing what happened to them.
Okay.
You know, the other thing was the attendant, another responsibility was to collect the eggs.
Mm-hmm.
And the attendants were allowed to keep the eggs and sell them once they got to their destination. So that was a little bonus for the attendants, because the buyers of the chickens weren't interested in the eggs. So the attendant got to keep the eggs, and I'm sure a few of those eggs got fried up every day for breakfast or lunch or something. So, but let's see, live poultry shipping. Okay, 50% of live poultry moved by rail. By 1940, it dropped to just 27% as trucks and highway improvements brought, and then the ability to ship dressed poultry by refrigerator car. And you know, we're all familiar with the depression of, you know, the crash in 29 depression. A lot of families lost farms, but people still needed to eat. So companies like North American, Fruit Growers Express, Merchants Dispatch, etc., still prospered in the 30s because they still had to ship and move food items. You know, truck traffic, they came up with a dual refrigerator poultry car for less than carload shipments. The live poultry end could carry about 2,500 birds. The reefer end had space for dressed poultry, eggs, butter, and other perishable goods. And you saw these cars running probably more on branch lines and further away from the major markets. So here is a photo of one of these combination cars. This is a 1928, and you can see it was a company based out in Kansas. And this car was put in service on the Rock Island. This photo actually came out of a Rock Island publication, their monthly magazine. So Still had the attendance space in the middle, reefer on one end, poultry on the other end. So, and then, you know, as I said, shipping started to decline. There were some, the dual flow adjustments there. Some cars were given reported marks as HLSX, which was for humane livestock shipping. North American started cutting back, retired 1,000 cars, and the shift to dress poultry became very evident. And I think a lot of this was also probably brought about by World War II. The servicemen got accustomed to eating, you know, canned chicken or frozen that had been shipped over. So when they came home, they had no problem with, didn't have to be live. Though I had an uncle who was known to make a barnyard language response to something about store-bought chicken when he had to go and eat somewhere else. So here is the humane livestock car. This was the HLSX. The attendance room was at the end, and this was as you can see, it looks like a triple deck stock car, and these did not last long and they became stock cars. Here is another version of the humane livestock car. This is number 2. You just saw photo number 1, and you can see this is a double deck. Became a stock car because they just didn't, the designs just didn't work for the live poultry for whatever reason. So, and okay, so after the 1944, we're coming towards the end of the war. North American created a new company called Poultry Transit Company to offload their failing poultry business, and they transferred cars to that. Retired, they were down to just 237 cars in 1947. By 1950, only 15 cars remained. So the business really disappeared during the 40s, especially after the war. And we got 2 different dates as to when the last poultry car was actually used. American Poultry Historical Society says 56. The AAR listed poultry shipments as late as 1961. So that gives you an idea for those of you who are thinking you want to model some poultry car traffic. There's some dates for you to work with. We had another, this was National Poultry Car. NHX became known as National Huckster Company in 1933. But again, you see the poultry car designs have not really changed. They stayed basically the same. So we're just going to look at various poultry cars and where they were located. This is in Whitehall, Wisconsin. We got a car loaded with birds ready to go. Here is another one, just 507. Here's a car loaded with live pigeons as the logo of the banner across the door. And you can see the door open. You get a little bit of a hint of what the attendance space was like. Pigeons were, I like to say this was the poor man's version of the Sunday chicken dinner. And pigeons were heavily consumed up through the early 1900s because they were readily accessible. They were a smaller bird, or pigeons, whereas chickens were kind of expensive to get them into the cities where the population was. And so only the well-to-do families had chicken. Everybody else, it was pigeons and pork because that was just readily available. And there was one of the presidents ran on a campaign of a chicken in every pot. He wanted to bring about prosperity for the nation. So
it's interesting roof vents there.
Oh yes, let's go back. Yeah, I don't know if those are on that car or on something behind that car, but
yep.
Yeah, because you look here at the end and there's just, it looks like a little narrow white structure. So those might be vents on that building. I'm not sure, Joel.
Good call.
Yeah, I don't have a really large image of this photo. That's why it's not filling the screen. So I can't tell. Here is, I can't remember which city this is, but look at all the chicken crates that are stacked up here waiting for farmers to come back and retrieve them. So they've been loading, or they may be stacked there ready to bring in a string of poultry cars to unload and then haul these off to the processing plant. So anyone recognize this freight house and depot? Nope, must not be in Michigan. So here's just a photo. You can see the farmers, they got the chicken crates stacked up on the dock. They're getting ready to carry them inside the attendance room here where they'll be taken out of the coop and put in the cages. Here is a cage with turkeys. This is an early photo. And you're gonna see the crate on the portable scales. And the process was the farmer grower of the birds would bring them to the loading point. Their crate would be weighed. They would get paid either by the number of birds or the weight of the birds. It varied a little bit, and then the farmer would get his check, and the birds would go into the car. So here we see a bunch of farmers with their crates. They're waiting for the poultry car to show up. And this is in Lumberton, North Carolina, and you can see there's several poultry cars back here, a lineup of cars and the crates. And so this was typically what happened, and I've got some pictures of ads. They would advertise when a poultry car would be in town and often what they would be paying for birds. And that way everybody would get word out and they would know what day to come into town to do the transfers. And so that we've just got photos of that's what's happening. And here's an example of the guys carrying the chickens into the car. You can see the crates stacked there, and yeah, you can see the one vent for the stove and the attendant's spot, but no other vents. So I'm pretty sure that photo, Joel, was that building behind. So yeah, this is Berkner Brothers handling poultry. So this is a photo was labeled first poultry shipment by the county in 1924. I think this is down in Arkansas somewhere. You can see these guys are pretty happy. They were finally going to make some money. So and there they are loading up their birds. Here we see, I think this is Hastings Company, Hastings, Nebraska. The car is the Yunkin. We've got some other advertising scribbled on the door with chalk. The crew, all waiting there. This is a photo I just acquired from the Joe Colias collection this summer. And this is in Enid, Oklahoma. That's on to Frisco. This is 1913. They're shipping them birds from Oklahoma all the way to New York City. The main reason because New York City was the main market for live birds. So, but it is just a nice photo of a nice string of poultry cars there. Here's another one similar. You can also see, looks like somebody's been cleaning out cars somewhere, but these cars were designed, you'll notice there's a little, let me back up. I think this is a clearer photo. No, we'll get to another photo. I'll explain. Here we go. Notice the wire sides are only about 11 inches tall, and you've got a opening here. And these the cages were built in. This was the opening was designed so the attendant could reach in from the outside and sweep out all the chicken poop and stuff, and that's how they could clean. And the boards that were the floor of these cages are slanted just a little bit so things would slide out to the outside, so they could kind of clean it. But here we are. This is in charge of a Nebraska live poultry butter and egg special. Car is Boss. The cars had names and they also had numbers that were down here on the side. So this is out of the California State Museum. we were talking about the attendance. The person who would assemble a poultry shipment would hire someone to ride the shipment to help load, fill the cages during the first few days of the trip, and then they would ride the entire time in the car to feed and water the birds, keeping them alive, gaining weight, hopefully. Dead birds had to be removed quickly and to reduce the threat of any disease. And after the car was unloaded and cleaned, the carman left the stateroom and the car was returned empty. And sometimes the carman would get a passenger ticket for return back to where he came from. Sometimes he was on his own and would have to use whatever payment he received for getting to his next wherever he wanted to go. So, and here is, you can see the fellows here in the doorway, but this is the interior. This is their little stove they had. You can see it was over a pair of overalls hanging there. You got sacks of feed ready to fill the feed bunk, and then they were pretty sparse accommodations, and with all the ventilation, I'm sure they were odorific. So, and there were rules for these in 1922. If a single owner was shipping up to 5 cars, he could have 1 carman. If he was shipping more than that, 2, then 3. No women or children were allowed. The return passage reimbursement or the ticket had to be used within 60 days. Most were not given the return fare. And it was Western Roads usually gave you a reimbursement or pay for a coach seat to points west of Chicago. And if they were shipped without a carman, the contract would be no caretaker in charge. If they were shipping a number of poultry cars, then they might have what they called a caretaker's car, perhaps an old passenger car, so they could get a break. They could travel between the cars to check the birds and then go back to their old coach seat. So, and here is a poultry car. Let's see, Toledo, St. Louis, and Western, I think this car was. Anyway, you can see it set it up similar to any livestock, a drover's caboose, as we sometimes call them. Got some bunks, a table, a seat, and a stove, and then the indoors so they could go in and out of the poultry cars. I have not seen I haven't seen any photos of these per se, but most of the guys just traveled just like these characters are. They have been loading down in Gentry, Arkansas. This is a USDA inspection film. So there's the USDA guys looking at the birds to see if they're healthy or not. They are, he throws them back in. If you're familiar with chickens, you understand what that is saying. So he's feeling for that to see if they've been overfed. And there he's found a bird that was not doing well, so he wrung its neck. And then when they will dispose of those birds, either throwing them into a container garbage can, or if it's a moving car, he'll just toss them out the door. And there's the attendant. You can see that fellow's only got one arm, but he's got permission that he's passed inspection and ready to move on. Oh, let's see, that didn't work. Okay, there's another car. I've collected a lot of these photos, so just to give you an idea what they look like. And here's here we got typically they were called produce houses. the Henderson and Sons Produce Company here, the poultry, eggs, and butter, and they've got a couple poultry cars come in. They're loading up with chickens, but they also, this is where the farmers would come into town. The wives would go sell their eggs and the butter, maybe their chickens, and the family would, you know, they'd do their shopping for the day, maybe take in a show that evening before heading back home. That was the typical Saturday business in many small rural communities. There's a nice shot of, again, of a poultry car, a builder's photo, the long, but they got dirty quickly. So let's see, car poultry shipped by Arlington Produce Company in 1921. This is a Swift building. Swift had a produce end that they handled poultry, eggs, butter, etc. And they even had large poultry operations. In Dubuque, Iowa, they had a chicken and duck farm operation. So here we see one sitting out where the crates are sitting there. So there you can see just a standard freight dock at a freight house where they've loaded up the birds. You can see some end detail. These cars are pretty much built on a steel flat car type frame with a wood structure and wood ends. Here is a car that's being, I think, rebuilt or could be under construction. You see a steel skeleton of sorts, but it's still pretty much all wood, the roof and the ends with the steel structure. And then there is one poultry car that still exists in this country. It's car number 423, was parked at a siding in Illinois in 1950. And the number was carried the Palace Poultry car number of 5568. It was just used as a place to hold chickens. The National Museum of Transportation spotted it in 57, tried to persuade the company to donate it, and they wouldn't. And then finally, 28 years later, after the owner of the J.H. Brown Company died, a new owner donated to the museum in St. Louis. And here is that car as of in recent years. It's deteriorating quite rapidly, and they got it stored back. You can't get in to see it because it's in a building that's not open to the public anymore. But this is a poultry Palace car. But here you can see that opening I was talking about in the boards, so they could reach in with kind of a scraper of some sort and scrape out the floor of each of the coops or cages. And you can see this looks more like what we would call a chain link fencing. That was and you can see the interior of the car is in pretty sad shape. Some more photo. Here we got somebody up on top checking the water supply on this car. Another one parked at a dock. Here we go. No, I think this is yep, we saw this one already. Okay. Like I said, New York City was the main market. They got 250 cars a week. Each of these cars would hold 4,000 plus birds. So you figure 250 cars a week at 4,000 plus birds. They got a lot of chickens going into New York City, as well as the ducks and pigeons, etc. So, yeah, 80% is purchased by Orthodox Jews. So for the kosher meals. Yeah, my understanding is they have to use a special knife. They kill it in a certain way. I know with beef, you got to bleed them to death. You slit their throat and bleed them. So, not being Jewish myself, I don't understand all the dietary rules and restrictions, but it adds an interesting twist to the shipment of meat as well as poultry. Now here is in the winter months, they had canvas curtains that they would hang on the side of the cars. And here you can see a couple of fellows hanging the curtain. This is a snap from a video that I think is the next video. Yeah, here we are. And that's why you'll see 4 ladders on the side of a poultry car. There's 2 on either side of the coop area so that they can climb up there and hang the canvas curtain. So that was something else that might be carried in that attendance space. Here's the New York City market area. Looks very similar to any kind of a produce. So whether they're shipping vegetables, fruits, here we got chickens coming in. So the tally board keeping track of. You guys are all, of course, enjoying a good breakfast of eggs and turkey bacon, right?
There's a poultry car right outside along the side of the restaurant.
Ah, okay. Now here's a photo that I just got these a couple weeks ago. I see it didn't quite label, but this is turkeys being loaded in Little Current, Canada, up I think in Saskatchewan, Canada, and they were placing the canvas covers on it because you can see all the snow. And I have not seen this car, this name before, so I've got to get that in my records. But it was just they were shipping turkeys out of Canada back then. So, and here's what a nice clean car looked like inside. And then here you can see the attendant working the upper coops. And you can see how messy it gets in there. So you can imagine what his life was like during the week. And here another shot of that same fellow here. And then you can see the interior of another car. And this fellow's inspecting the birds. And it looks like we've got a dead one on the floor where he's wrung the neck. And the attendants, as the car was traveling and moving, that would be his responsibility, checking the condition of the birds. And if he found one that was dead or diseased, pull it out of the cage there and then dispose of it. And if the car was moving, it just toss it off on the right of way, let the coyotes get it or something like that. So, and of course, I mentioned advertising. Here we've got of Gary Incorporated. They're saying we're going to have a poultry car on 2 days. Bring your birds in. Prices are high. Tell your neighbors. So here's some more ads. This is from North Carolina in 1927. They're going to be there one day at Lincolnton, and here's what they're paying for different, you got heavy breed boilers, we're going to pay 35 cents. If you got cocks, it's just 10 cents. So, and then here's a little something about, this came from a newspaper, car poultry ready to go, belonging to the Table Rock Poultry, was struck on each end by switch trains and badly wrecked. Many of the fowl were killed, others got away and had to be run down. Typical small town newspaper report. So, and then you also had railroads got involved with advertising. Union Pacific encouraging people to move out to the Pacific Northwest, saying that only $1,000 investment would get you started with a poultry ranch, which you could set yourself up for life. So this is let's see, photo of the Monroe branch. Can't remember where that's located at, but shipping chickens out and identifying all the guys who were there. So, and then of course you also truck traffic. Trucks played a big role in moving chickens as well. Is what they call the poultry pullman. Here he's got 10,000 pounds of poultry going from Glandorf, Ohio to Buffalo, New York. So here we got another truck loaded with crates. Here's a fellow who's had to pull over the side to take a look at something with some of the birds that he's got loaded. Now let's get into the modeling aspect. There have been models created of poultry cars. Ambroid and Northeast scale models produced the Livesay poultry car and the Speedy poultry reefer combination car. These car kits were developed in the 50s and were available. You can still find them on eBay, but neither one is very prototypical. They're typical of the typical wood kits from the 50s. Mainline models also produced a wood kit, and it's got even less details than the Ambroid kits. And then articles were published, back when these cars were still seen and being used. Model Railroader published some articles, and there's the references there. Now here is the Ambroid kit that someone built, and you can see it intended to be half refrigerator car and half poultry. So it's, as I said, it's typical of the 50s Craftsman wood kit. This one was not done very well. There have also been some ready-to-run models. Overland released a brass model of a Palace poultry car, very close to being prototypical. Still has a few flaws, but it's, if you're really serious, you can still find these on eBay once in a while, but be prepared to shell out $600+ for one. Bachmann and then Tyco had a tri-level stock car that modeled after that Humane livestock car #1 that was later in the 30s. And then Bachmann just this last year announced a new poultry car model, which they've been selling. They're running $51 a piece now, and what it is, looks like they took their steel box car, cut the sides off, and put on what looks like a poultry car side. And then, of course, Lionel's done some poultry cars as well. So here is that Overland brass model. You can see it looks very nice. I mean, it replicates the look of a poultry car. Unfortunately, they didn't do anything on the interior as far as the coops or the cages. And so you would, to make this car, if you were going to paint it and fix it up, you'd want to do that. Here is the Bachmann Humane livestock car. This one's been around for a number of years now. And here's the Lionel one. The Lionel one even had, I think, lights and sound, and the sides are just printed. That's just a printed plastic with silhouettes of chickens. This is the new Bachmann car they just came out with about a year or so ago. It was $50, now it's $51. And you can see it really looks, it's got a steel roof, it's got steel ends. It's still got the sliding boxcar door slides, and all they've done is just put the poultry attendance door on it. And this is they've labeled this particular one Speedy, and I've never seen a poultry car with a lettering board on the side like this. So I wouldn't spend my money on one of these guys. I just wouldn't. I said this one is a Speedy. Well, here's the actual Speedy car. This is the one that Ambroid did a model of, that crude looking model. And then, Bachmann, I'm not even sure I'd pay $5 for it, let alone 50. So it's your money, your choice. Details for the models, of course, I mentioned the coop area and the floors. The boards were made of tongue and groove. They could be removed for cleaning or adjusted. If you were shipping turkeys, you would pull out the boards between two of the coops so that you could put in a larger bird. Narrow walkway between the so the carman could get there. And then of course the stateroom, if you're going to have that door open, you're going to want the details of the stove and a bunk and a sink. And then of course you need the feed bunk underneath and the water above. This is one that I came across this last year. It's a 3D printed car. And the fellow, at least he's put in the stanchions for holding up those cages. He hasn't got the cages in there, and you can see he hasn't got the floorboards going across. But here's his website if you're really interested in that. Here is a model that someone built. At least you get a hint of the flooring. He hasn't done the separate, looks like he's using some of that wedding veil tool for the sides, and he's just done one long piece across here and then drawn. But that's not a bad model of a poultry car. Want to talk about the roof walk and ventilation. Yeah, chickens are hot. They generate more heat, especially if they're packed close together, and they are prone to panic and smother others in the coop. And this is especially true with the turkeys. That's why they open mesh sides. And they also had center roof hatches with the roof walk, and those were hinged. But here's some more details about that. But here you can see on some cars, you can see how that's opened with the sides that are hinged and folded down here. Here's an overview. This was in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and you can really see these ventilations on the poultry cars. You can see in the middle of the car, you can see the access hatch for that water tank, but you can see the vents have been opened up, and you just want to be careful if you're the brakeman walking on these roof walks that you don't step off to the side and go down through the ventilation. It looks like someone has stepped off, broken that piece of roof walk there. So, and here's another shot of that type of detail. And notice this is just wood roof. It's not a metal roof. So I'd say in more details, yeah, the thin canvas muslin covers. You know, if you wanted to just model the winter, you could just do a car with a curtain on it. Nobody would know that it wasn't. But the real measurements, and I know Kristen, she was trying to figure out how to get a prototypically correct metal sides. The screen wire is 1/8 inch diameter. It's all very similar to what we would call a chain link fence or a cyclone fence in certain parts of the country. 1.5 inch square diamond pattern, and then the steel channel framing. The length of the screens is 11 inches tall, 14 feet, 6 inches across the side of the car, and the gap is 3 inches. So this is a model, this is that Overland brass. It was available in HONO, and a fellow by the name of Lee Turner, who's very well known for his weathering, took that brass model, and you can see he has included the interior with chickens and has finished it off. Very nice looking car, very nice. So, and of course, if you were in collecting baseball cards in the 50s, Topps Bubble Gum also did freight cars, and this is their Topps Bubble Gum car, the poultry car, and it's probably the only hint we have for the color of these cars. And you can see it looks like pretty much a boxcar red or oxide red, and maybe a brown or brown for the underframe. Some of them had yellow, but that is the end. So.
Thank you, Doug. Great stuff. I know the last time I saw this, and I can't remember which group it was that I watched it, and I said, you know what, we need to bring this to this group, and we need to do it right at Thanksgiving, so we're all prepared for next week.
Yeah.
But and again, there are some people who would want to model that as a industry on their layout and stuff like that. I would add the smell of scenery. You know, you can have a short session one evening because of the smell driving them out of the basement. But the fact is that there are some that want that model that period, and that's a part of the real world stuff. So
That's right. You know, and you mentioned scenery. Even if you don't have a poultry car on your railroad, you want to maybe have a dead chicken laying along the right of way every so often.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you could always have the fake loading dock and the fake unloading dock. And it's just, sorry, guys, tonight we don't have any loads that came in, but tomorrow they're supposed to be here. So you can simulate the traffic and, for a different session.
And there are companies, people out there that are now doing 3D printed chicken crates. And I think laser cut stuff. So you could have a loading dock stacked up with a bunch of empty crates, or if you could do live crates. I've read where several people, all they've done is taken little pieces of cotton balls, and dabbed a red dot on there to represent the beak or the wattle of the chicken, and stick them in the crates of the cars to represent. Similar to what you do with sheep. If you got a double deck stock car, you just put a cotton ball in there, paint a black nose on it, and you got a load of sheep, a bunch of cotton balls, and you can do similar to replicate the chickens. So there are ways about doing it. And again, the Overland brass model, every once in a while pops up on eBay, but the prices have just jumped on those things in the last couple of years because I started watching for them.
Yeah. No, I met Kristen a couple of times at conferences. I think I met her for the first time in the Chicago Railroad Prototype Modelers Convention, and I met her out in Pennsylvania, either the Western one in Pittsburgh or the Eastern one out there. And she was working hard to try and come up with a way to make the 3D printed cars and the research. And she just hadn't got it all together yet, but she seemed to be, as you said, the expert in that model and the field and gathering the information. So
she is one. And then there's another lady on the East Coast. I can't remember if she's in Boston, and she has been working on 3D printing, and printing the actual car and the uprights and the cages. But it's getting the covering, and that we were involved with some discussion about how would you replicate that iron, the chain link fencing mesh covering for the cars.
Yeah.
And I remember it's been about a year or so ago that Ted Collada came across a tea company that with their tea in tea bags that he thought was the tea bag material was just about the right size for the mesh on an HO poultry car. And so I bought a box. My wife likes tea, so I bought a box of the tea bags and told her to save the bags for me after you drink the tea, and stashing those away. And it was like $15 for a box of the tea, but if the bags are good for it, then that's. And I do have a couple. I have picked up, I think, one of the Embroid kits or something somewhere along the way. But it would be nice if someone could come out with a 3D printed, I think, is the way to go to get a good structure for the car. And then we would be on our own for covering, coming up with the screening. But if you're doing O scale, that tulle wedding veil fabric would work really well. It works for chain link fence and HO, but I'm just not sure it would work on the poultry car. But people would get the idea of what you were doing if you wanted to do that. So.
Well, it's certainly something you could add to the operations of your layout. And like I said, whether you have a car or not, you could still have the process there, the incoming and the outgoing, buildings and the delivery and just, it's sorry, guys, it's not happening on this operating session tonight,
Well, and if you have the produce company there, you just move a reefer in to get the eggs, butter, and the dressed poultry. I've got a town on my layout where there was a poultry producer, and it was basically reefers that went in and out. It could be they did poultry cars, but Iowa doesn't have a large Jewish population, and the Jewish families had ready access there. People raising chickens in their own backyards in most towns, and even the cities. It was no trouble to get a load of chickens into the local market,
right,
from a farm 20 miles away. It's the major cities: Philadelphia, Boston, New York City, Baltimore, DC. Those were somewhat to some extent Chicago. And it was amazing. The birds were coming out of places, of course, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, but there are birds being shipped from Tennessee, Kentucky, Oklahoma, the Midwest birds going into the Jewish markets in the Chicago area. On the West Coast, the Jewish markets in San Francisco and Los Angeles were being fed by areas that raise chickens like Petaluma. So,
did you, in your history of looking at meatpacking plants, obviously we bring in cattle or cows, we bring in pork. Were any of those companies also associated with bringing in chickens or poultry and stuff like that? Was there a crossover at all between, okay, I'm doing cows and I'm doing pigs, so I cross over and do chickens?
The big companies like Swift and Armor, et cetera, had produce arms where they dealt with chickens, ducks, et cetera. I'm not sure if they happened in the same plant or not. I haven't come across any reference that where chickens were being slaughtered in the same place that beef and hogs were being slaughtered, but it's possible. I mean,
just because they're already in that business, and it's just another type of live animal coming in that's got to be processed and cut up.
And certainly the branch houses that were owned by Swift and Armor, et cetera, were receiving dressed poultry as well as carcasses to be further processed into, into whatever the housewife or the restaurant was wanting. So,
well, I was just thinking for David Gunn, because just to the left of his new Swift building, there's a little space there on the layout to get into the chicken business too. He's got a long winter to go, and there could be a little chicken operation over there.
Well,
I do have one live poultry car built and another one in wood kit form to do. So I want to detail the inside of that one.
Yes. Yeah, because they were a see-through car, it's the details inside that are so crucial to make them stand out. That model I showed you that had been finished by Lee Turner really said this is the way it's got to be done. Mm-hmm. So
well, I've learned an awful lot from the show today.
Well,
lots of ideas.
It's a lot of information. It's something that many people aren't familiar with because most of the poultry car business disappeared after World War II. So those of us who are alive today don't have any recollection of. But there are photos out there, and it wasn't a huge, less than 3,000 cars at its total covering the country is, pretty sparse. But at the same time, main freight trains going into major metropolitan areas often would have a couple poultry cars. So
would that be a front end car like the other kinds of stock cars and stuff like that?
I would assume so. I've not come across any reference, and Kristen didn't have anything in her materials. So
any questions from the gang here?
High priority. So they were given top billing to get live birds from one place to the next without sitting on sidings for very long.
Only for the loading purposes, and I've seen references of cars taking up to a week to get to where they're headed from where they got started, like a car that was loaded in Nebraska or Oklahoma that was going to New York City might travel for a week and might have 2 or 3 stops in the first couple of days to pick up more birds. And then once it was loaded, it just pretty much went straight through because the attendant was on there 24 hours a day. He lived with those birds until they were delivered. So, and he got paid better if they were weighed more than when he picked them up and loaded them into the car. So that was an incentive for him.
Imagine what shape the attendant was in after that long of a period of time, having been exposed to agricultural barns today that are as long as football fields. You had one end to the other down those bird racks, and boy, when they got disturbed, their wings would fly, 4 or 5 birds to a cage. Let me tell you what happened to the pool. 300 feet, I was wearing it well again, so I can only imagine a guy that had to be in there all the time. He must have been in pretty good shape at this destination.
Well, and you got to remember that back in those days, the Saturday night bath was the common thing. And so a week in a car followed by a bath or a shower was the norm.
That's probably why they had trouble finding seats for them on nice passenger trains going home.
Yeah, well, they'd get to wherever they're going, and I'm sure the first thing they've sought out was a place with a bath and a bed.
Yeah.
And then they could get cleaned up and maybe enjoy the sights of the city and then head back for home. Because you talk to anybody that moved with their livestock. I've talked to a few people who moved with their cattle going to Chicago, and that was sometimes the treat was you stayed overnight in a hotel downtown Chicago, saw the sights, came home the next day on the train.
Yeah, one of my trips to Saudi Arabia on the way home, or in Saudi Arabia, we came home and I stayed in a fire station in London for a couple of nights and days and went to fires. And that Saturday night before I had to go to the airport on Sunday morning, we were out on fires all night long, and I didn't have a place to take a shower. I had to get to the airport, all these things from the fire station. And I got on the airplane and everybody's like, man, you smell like smoke. Like you've been to a fire. And I was all night long at fires in London. Things were burning down and I was there. Sorry, I didn't get a shower.
Yeah.
And my partner was over at another place and we met at the airport and he brought me my suitcase, and so I didn't have a place to change clothes or anything until I got home back to Detroit or wherever I was coming into from London. But yeah, that's a problem. You don't make a lot of friends on those flights.
Yeah.
They just want to know why you stink.
Yep. So, well, I'm happy to share with you guys. So,
I have
one more question here, Doug.
Yes.
On the loading part of it, I understand then that they would have loaded these cars from just about anywhere out in the Midwest where they might have had a team track or a loading dock where farmers would bring it in by horse and buggy or an old-time car. Typically, was all the unloading done at processing plants, produce centers back in the big cities? They didn't have any unloading going on in smaller areas?
I'm not real sure. I understand that these birds would be destined to a place where there was a market or a processing plant. And I showed you a lot of freight houses with crates stacked up. Yeah. And so they might be unloaded onto trucks that would then be driven to the slaughterhouse operation. So that, so they might have been handled a couple times at a large freight dock. And that's why, if you got a freight house, you might want to, if it's got an open area, you might want to have some chicken coops stacked up there in one end or a bunch of them waiting for a poultry train to come in. So, and of course there were we're dealing with live birds as indicated in that one film, 80% went to the kosher market in the Jewish communities in New York City. So the live birds were not a big market for the rest of the population of the country, and the Jewish population in the United States is, 10-12%? I used to know that number, but I can't recall anymore. It's not a large number. So live birds might be going to a Swift plant where they were then slaughtered, dressed out, and shipped in refrigerator cars to the grocery warehouses. So yeah, you might have that. I'd have to do a little bit more research. So.
Well, good stuff. Well, Doug, thank you very much for sharing this with us today. And it looks like everybody's enjoyed it, got some ideas, and we wish you a happy Thanksgiving next week.
Sure.
And, enjoy that bird when it comes. And
well, we just bought an Amana smoked ham.
Oh, okay.
Watching too much review.
Okay, well, enjoy that then too.
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's good to see Dave. I've communicated with him a lot this last year or so, and Joel I'm familiar with, and of course Rich, and some of the others. And so you all have a good holiday as well. And even those of you who live outside the United States, Dave, you enjoy your.
We will. Thank you. And you. Thanks so much, Douglas.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Well done.
Oh, thank you. All right. Give me a holler, Rich, when you want another one.
Okay. Thank you, Doug.
Yeah.
Take care.